Welcome to another week, another show of Hawkeyed with me, Dave O'Hara. Pleased to be joining you. Thanks for tuning in. Got another great show lined up for you this week, and I know you'll think so after watching and listening to it. Joe Mershman will join me here in just a moment, our good buddy Joe with Mershman Seeds, and of course the former Hawkeye quarterback. I say of course because he joined us during the regular season the whole time, 15 straight weeks before, during, and after the regular season. But James Vandenberg is back to give us his update on spring football and his thoughts, and who better to talk to than a former Iowa quarterback, with Spencer Petras now having a spring football under his belt, or will be, as well as Deuce Hogan and Alex Padilla, the quarterbacks, and how important that is for quarterback development, as well as the team. And then we'll close out the show, as usual, with our buddy David Eickholt, Hawkeye Insider. That being said, I've located my buddy Joe Mershman. Joe, first and foremost, it's been a couple weeks, my friend. How you doing? How's the spring treating the ag industry? What's happening, my friend? Thanks for joining us.
Well, it's we had a good start, but then now we're delayed by rain and cool weather, but we hope that turns around. Farmers are ready to go. We need to raise a big crop this year because demand is strong. China has been buying a lot of our grain, and so the prices are pretty strong right now for farmers. So they're pretty optimistic, but of course they know the weather is going to play a big part in it this year.
As it always does. And Joe, greatly appreciate your insights on that. And I want to talk about your trip to Indiana a couple of weeks ago for the Hawkeyes. First, you were there for the Big Ten tournament, and then, of course, March Madness. And I want to talk to you about that briefly, and then we'll close out your segment talking about the Cup of Joe, the YouTube show you do every Saturday. So let's talk about your trip to Indiana. You went out there back-to-back weeks, getting frequent driver miles, my friend, blazing a trail to Indianapolis. So talk about your experience at the Hawkeyes. First, the big victory they had against Grand Canyon University, and then the upset and the bummer losing to Oregon. Talk about that, if you would. The whole experience for you as far as the crowd goes, the games itself, and some of the interactions you had.
I was very fortunate to get tickets, number one, and my family went out, and we really enjoyed it. The first game against Grand Canyon was at the arena that's at the State Fairgrounds. And what was really interesting about that game was that the folks from the Grand Canyon chartered some planes and brought a bunch of the students along. So they were pretty enthusiastic, and it was a little bit more than the normal because everything's all spaced out because of COVID and everything. So, it's almost church quiet. I mean, because you're used to these crowds, but the Grand Canyon students did a great job and had a lot of fun. Fortunately, we won that game, and the next game was at the Pacers Arena, and that is a beautiful, beautiful facility. One of the largest video screens I've ever seen inside a basketball stadium. So it was a great venue, but we just couldn't stop that 3 points from draining in. Just like they were raining in, and then the following game, they weren't so good. So we caught them at the wrong time.
Yeah, Oregon had that game off, as everybody talks about the VCU game. They didn't have to play a game early, and so that old rest over rust debate in sports talk, and we had that a couple of weeks ago. So greatly appreciate you taking us through your trip there. I got to say this to you as we go into spring here, and we got about 10 seconds. I want your takeaway on this. You excited for spring football at Iowa? I got to believe you are.
Well, I'm just excited that maybe we can go back and start watching them again. And I think Iowa, they have a system, they know how to develop the players, and the coaches do a great job. You can always count on Iowa to be competitive. And this is a year that I know the fans are going to be thirsting to get back in that stadium. And I'm sure the players are going to be excited to hear some roars from the crowd rather than the silence that they had to deal with this past year.
You're exactly right, Joe. Thanks so much, my friend. I look forward to catching up with you in a couple weeks.
All right. Take care.
For Joe Mershman, this is Dave O'Hara, Hawkeyed with me. We'll be back with more, and James Vandenberg, former Hawkeye quarterback, in just a few moments.
When you're a farmer, there's a lot of things you can't control, but there is a way to give your soybeans an early advantage. Mershman Seeds soybean seed treatment featuring Turpidity ST. An independent analysis has proven faster and more even emergence every time. Just look at the Mershman difference. Give your crop the boost it needs for a uniform stand. For the best yields, grow with us. Mershman Seeds.
Welcome back to Hawkeyed with me, Dave O'Hara. And as you can see on the screen, my buddy James Vandenberg. He's back. It's been a while, and we want to talk some spring football. And I thought, who better than James Vandenberg to talk to, former Hawkeye quarterback. Great. James also now with the Cordo Investment Group. You got the quarterback in James Vandenberg, the former Iowa quarterback, and you got the former Iowa wide receiver in Bill Happel Jr. Great partnership for your financial future. So again, Cordo Investment Group's very own James Vandenberg. James, I told you off the air. Well, first of all, thanks for joining us as always, and great to have you back. Good to see you. It's been a while. You doing okay?
Thanks for having me, Dave. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah. Well, I was just telling our friend Joe Mershman, I said, it's been a while since I've talked to James, and started thinking, who better than James Vandenberg to talk about spring football, either having it, not having it, especially being a quarterback at Iowa. And the name Spencer Petras is on everybody's coming out of their mouth thinking, how's he going to do this year? So James, first of all, the highlights of James Vandenberg, I wanted to regale you in what you had said as you're smiling here. Now get ready. It's all good. You had mentioned when the Hawkeyes started 0-2 this year, and everybody was piling on Spencer Petras and what's wrong, and they had games they shoulda, coulda, woulda won, had leads, couldn't close out. And you had talked about this way back in November. You said, Dave, I'm not making excuses, but without a spring football, traditional spring football, and now he's into the starting lineup. Oh, by the way, James, and he had of his majority of interceptions were in those first couple games. He closes out the year with more touchdowns, far more touchdowns than interceptions, 5 in the last 2 games. Has a very nice year. Hawks go 6-2 on a 6-game win streak. Unfortunately, the Michigan game was canceled because of their issues with COVID, as was the Missouri Bowl game against Missouri was canceled because of Missouri's issues with COVID. So even back in November, you spot on hit this, my friend, that I think, I don't want to overblow the expectations, but with a spring football under his belt as a starting quarterback, this is only going to make Spencer Petras and the Hawkeye offense better, but just the team in general. You talk about his backups in Deuce Hogan and also in Alex Padilla. Your former offensive coordinator, Ken O'Keefe, was talking about as a quarterback's coach now how much everybody's benefiting from this. So I'm going to step aside, let you talk a little bit about the development of the team, but then also the offense and a quarterback at Iowa, especially in spring football, please.
Well, yeah, when you think about kind of the schedule during the season, I mean, it's really only 1s and 2s that take the majority of reps as you prep for a week. And so, I mean, spring football is kind of the foundation as a young guy or a developmental guy is how they term it at Iowa. I mean, that's when you get by far the bulk of your reps. And so if you're a 2, a 3, a 4, I mean, there's 5 guys in the quarterback room a lot of times. And during the season, only 1 and 2 take real reps. And even number 2 doesn't take as many reps as number 1. And so just in general, your total workload is so much bigger in the spring. I mean, it's repetition. It's like anything else. The 10,000 hour rule, the more you do something, the more time you go through the same plays, the more times you see different defensive looks, the better you get at reacting to it. And that's at every position, but arguably the most at quarterback.
Yeah, and as you mentioned last year, and even now when you chuckle and say that, I mean, think about all that's put on you, responsibility, signals, calls, changing plays. You've got to know everybody's move, not just your move. A lot of position guys can go ahead and just say, okay, I know my spot. But you've got to know where everybody's going. But I even think, as you mentioned too, not just with quarterback and the offense, but Iowa's going to be very strong, at least before injuries, or if there are any injuries, the defensive backfield, a lot of guys coming back. But it's been well known, James, that 75% of the Iowa football team that played last year has not had a full spring practice, either not injured or as a starter. That's pretty amazing when you talk about what they did last year without a lot of experience. And I'm not one to overblow spring football. But I think a lot of people will tell you, it's just guys running around in shells and helmets and shoulder pads. And it's going to be interesting to see how many of the fans show up this Saturday. We record this on Tuesday afternoon. Today is Friday night. So tomorrow, how many people are going to show up on Saturday for that first open to the public practice? So I'm just very curious on your thoughts as the development as a team in general. Are they going to be a little nervous, excited? I mean, it won't be like a home game.
I think spring football in general probably, is different for different teams on how important it is to them. And I think if you probably ask Coach Ferentz, we definitely are a program with how we build our athletes and how we recruit people that it's kind of a foundational pillar. USC might be able to skip spring ball. At Iowa, we believe in it. We believe in development. And so it's a big deal. What it actually means come this fall, I think that's hard to predict. But when you think of 75% of the guys that just haven't gone through those 15 practices, which are longer with more reps, and it's more evenly spaced reps, the ones don't take all of them. It's just so much work that gets done, and from every position. And really, I think, quarterbacks are big. Linemen, offense and defense, just getting a better understanding for the physicality of it, because you really get to bang on each other in the spring. It definitely pays dividends, and it's a foundation of our program, no doubt.
You just hit up on a couple of things that I was alluding to, and I'm glad you jumped in there. Alaric Jackson's gone. Tristan Wirfs the year before that. We've had Tristan on this show. He wins the Super Bowl his rookie year with Tampa Bay. But when you say, and then Kellenberger is quitting, has left football due to injury and other things. He's going to focus on other things in his life. So he would have had a chance to start, or at least had some experience. So now as a quarterback coming back for another year as the leader, starting quarterback in Spencer Petras, now he's going to have to talk to some linemen, talk them through some things. Again, I want you to highlight this as far as spring goes in the meeting rooms. Now that just isn't on the field, but even in the meeting rooms, you get a chance now to communicate with a lot of guys that are going to be protecting you, in Spencer Petras' case, who don't have experience playing or starting.
Yeah, no, it's multifaceted. It's one of those things where, you can learn something, and you can learn it in a non-pressured environment and in the meeting room, and that's great. And knowing where the ball should go if what happens. It's completely different though when you see it and it happens live, and here comes the linebacker off the edge. And it takes seeing that 5, 10, 20 times before all of a sudden it just becomes second nature. Oh, the ball goes there immediately. And that's something, that you're kind of highlighting Petras has missed, but that's for every position, quite frankly. There's no replacing live reps. And spring is, because they can space out practices, because they don't have to have a game to prep for. It's fundamentals and it's all the basics. But the more you do that stuff live, the more live bullets you see, the quicker you react. And so obviously any guy that's getting broken in, that's extremely important. But everybody benefits from the spring in some way, shape, or form.
And it's the other thing I want to mention besides linemen and your timing and talking to them and communicating. You just hit the other nail on the head, which is receivers and backs, where guys are going. And if things continue to be as healthy and good as they are, protocol-wise, pandemic, dealing with it and everything else, let's add that on top of, quarterbacks got to know where everybody's going. But now you get a chance to work on timing and issues like that instead of just communication. That's what spring and summer is for, and then leading into the fall season. So talk about that as well, as how important that development is with timing and communication with your tight ends, receivers, and backs.
No, yeah. You're bringing up a great point. And you can throw in the summer and do 7-on-7, and that certainly has benefits, but live timing is just different. It's different when you take a live snap and the center gets pushed back into you as you're backing away versus just standing there and saying set hut. So it's everything. It's timing for everybody. It's first step for linemen. It's picking up blitzes for backs. It's a receiver who doesn't just run a route on air, that he's got to jostle with a DB and then put on the brakes. It's those live reps are hard. And just like I said at the very beginning, just once the season starts, not that it completely goes away, but it becomes very minimal. You got to preserve to be able to play Saturday, and a lot of the hay's in the barn, so to speak. And so that real drill work isn't there because you got to preserve bodies for 12, 13, 14, 15 weeks. And this is the time, the green light, it's go. Your school loads technically, usually a little bit easier in the spring because you're not missing any Fridays. You're not having to prepare mentally as much for like a game week as you do. So it's just, all of that makes spring really important. And yeah, I expect us to take a big step. And it'll be awesome seeing what Petras does coming out of the spring, kind of taking this into the fall.
Well, I really appreciate your input. I know the listeners and viewers do as well, and I'm going to catch up with you as we roll into from the spring into the summer before the season starts. And then, of course, you'll be back to join us during the season every week as you did, and giving us your game analysis as well as even leading into games and previewing them. And I don't want to put any pressure on you, but, you were nicknamed Nostradamus last year because of your spot-on predictions, so don't forget that now. Thank you so much. It's great seeing you again. Man, 11 minutes just like that goes so quick with you. It's great catching up with you. Glad you and wife and kids are doing well. Business is going well for you and Bill Happel, again, part of the Corridor Investment Group, as you see James's information at the bottom of the screen there. Thank you so much, my friend. We'll look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thanks, Dave.
My pleasure as always. For James Vandenberg, the former Iowa Hawkeye quarterback, we'll be back with more Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. David Eickholt, the Hawkeye Insider, to close out the show. Back with more in just a few moments.
Hi, I'm Joel from Tice Chevrolet. We've lived through some very interesting times the last few months. Ensuring everyone's safety is more important than ever. That is why we're participating in the Chevy Clean program. At your request, we will pick up your vehicle, service it, and return it after we've cleaned it using the current CDC guidelines. This is just another way to work towards exceeding your expectations. So give us a call and let us show you what it means to be part of the Tice Automotive family.
Welcome back to Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. As you can see on the screen, my buddy David Eickholt joining us. David, the Hawkeye Insider. You see all his information on the bottom of the screen along with mine. Always excited to talk to him because we have information upon information upon information. So, David, thanks as always for joining us. And secondly, busy time. I know everybody thinks, well, you're not in basketball season, you're not in football season, no wrestling. What are you doing? Dave, you're very busy, and we're going to get into that in just a second. You doing okay?
Yeah, man, I'm all good. I'll tell you what, compared to last year, I'm so excited about everything that's happening. I'm excited to be covering spring football. You know, sometimes it's kind of a side point or a side part of the calendar for sports, but I'm so excited to have it back. And I think everybody is too, because as we've mentioned the past couple of weeks, Dave, it's not just one opportunity people get to see the Hawkeyes, they get two.
You know, James Vandenberg and I talked about that in the segment before you, and so we're going to get into that with you. But let's cover a few things before spring football first. You wrote some great pieces in the last couple of weeks on Luka Garza. Last week we left off where he had the auction. We record this on Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, and we mentioned that we knew that he was the player of the year, consensus in all 6 major categories, culminated by the Wooden Award last week. This airs on Friday night, of course, on TV and then online afterwards, DaveO'HaraSports.com, Sunday and afterwards. But I want to say this to you, David. On the NFT and the auction for charity, or a percentage of the proceeds went to the Stead Children's Family Hospital. Let's talk about that, the culmination of his NFT, the non-fungible token or the non-fungible transaction that he had last week, an auction. Get into that for us, if you would, please.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it started off the morning of the auction that was supposed to close. It was at $8,000. But after guys going back and forth for plenty of time, it ended up going for over $41,000, Dave. And again, a portion of that will go to the Iowa Children's Hospital. But along with that NFT, the non-fungible token, as you mentioned, it's a lifetime VIP pass to any Luka Garza basketball camp. I believe you get a private meditation session with Luka, which he believes it's such a key thing for outsiders to really begin to understand how he's achieved what he achieved in his college career. You get a game of horse with him, a dinner and a movie with him. You kind of get that one-on-one time that a lot of people would kill for to have with Luka Garza. And again, I think this is a very interesting market that people are going to have to follow for the next couple of seasons, because who knows how this will affect the NIL and if this is the type of thing that will impact future athletes. And I'll say this too, I believe that NFT card is already reselling. They already reposted it for $64,000. So, you know, as much as people want to deny it, it looks like cryptocurrency is the future, and Luka Garza might be helping pave the way for college athletes.
Yeah, that is interesting on so many levels. As you mentioned last week, we talked about this and with Bitcoin and what it's done over the last handful of years. And now you mentioned NFT and how that's going to affect name, image, and likeness, or the NIL, and if players are going to come back like Jordan Bohannon, that type of thing. So it's an interesting landscape we're in right now in college sports, and Luka is at the head of that. But again, fantastic work by you in just culminating the career of Luka Garza at the University of Iowa, record-setting career. And again, HawkeyeInsider.com or at David Eickholt via social media, or at Hawkeyes on 24/7 via social media. All the work is linked there, and please do give David the respect of the fantastic work he did and read through that. Great stuff, David. But transitioning from Luka over to the other great Hawkeye basketball player, which in women's Bluetooth Bunch, women's college basketball, Caitlin Clark. You've got a few tidbits on her, and they're not just tidbits. Again, this freshman that just completed her freshman year is going to be breaking news for the next 3 years for sure. You've got a lot of information on Caitlin upcoming. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, first of all, the Dawn Staley Award winner, Caitlin Clark, which is wore the nation's top overall guard, which was one of the few awards that Caitlin did win over UConn's Paige Beckers, but I do think that's worth mentioning. But doing a little bit of research today, Dave, with the WNBA, the draft eligibility, it's much, much different than it is for men's. Men's, you can do a one and done. You can go the G League route. Before WNBA, you have to be at least 22 years old or have graduated college. So remember, Caitlin Clark, I believe, turned 19 years old in January. So she's not going to be eligible until the 2024 WNBA draft, which guarantees her at least 3 more years in Iowa uniform. With that being said, if she does graduate in 3 years, she will be eligible to go to the WNBA. And it is something I'm very interested to see if the WNBA does bring up eventually, because like with the play we saw of Paige Beckers and Caitlin Clark this year, I think they're going to have to retable some of those discussions and kind of bring those back to the surface, because I think there's no doubt that both them could have contributed on a WNBA team this year. Again, if Kevin Durant says you belong in the WNBA right now, you're probably a hooper and you probably deserve to be on the roster.
Well, think about this too, David. We talked about NIL, name, image, and likeness, and she and Paige Beckers, Caitlin Clark and Paige Beckers could be at the forefront of that. They've had conversations already with the higher-ups, and so what an impact she's made in only her freshman year. So we'll look forward to more coverage from you on that, as always. And, of course, we talked about Spencer Lee not going to the Olympic trials due to injury. So, David, let's do this. Let's transition to spring football. And again, we just talked to James Vandenberg about this, more quarterback positioning specifically with Spencer Petras. So we'll keep an eye on that as spring progresses. But you've talked to a lot of people, that your followers and everybody else, fans of Iowa. Do you perceive or do you foresee a big turnout on Saturday for the open spring practice to fans, or what are you looking at?
I think that's the biggest question mark for me right now, Dave. I think a lot of people want to go. I think that Iowa is going to release a lot more information in terms of logistics of it. I believe it's free to get in. I'll need to double check on that, and I'll be sure to tweet that out. So be sure to check out my social media for that. But I do anticipate a big turnout. I mean, keep in mind, I think the last time people got a chance to see Iowa play a live football game was the Holiday Bowl over USC when Emir Smith-Marset had 3 touchdowns. I mean, you're talking about 15 to 16 months, Dave. I mean, I think they would have had an opportunity had the Iowa-Missouri Bowl game had actually happened, but we know how that turned out with all of the positive COVID cases within the Missouri football program. I think that's going to be a pretty decent turnout. And I do think it's going to be at least somewhat like a normal spring scrimmage. I don't think it's going to be a spring game per se, but I do think that people are going to be able to see live action football and just a preview of what next year's team's going to look like, because I think that there are a lot of returning guys, but I do think there's going to be a whole lot different with this team going into next season.
I'm glad you went there, because that's exactly what James and I talked about with, what did you say? I think you put this out on social last week, 75% of the Hawkeyes returning?
Roughly. I mean, you look at the 2 deep, Dave, on defense, there's only 4 seniors on the 2 deep on defense. When you're talking a lot of sophomores, a lot of juniors, heck, even some redshirt freshmen like Yahweh Black, who's the starting right defensive tackle right now, who has been talked about a whole lot since he got on campus at Iowa. But yeah, I mean, think about guys like Tyler Goodson, who was first team All Big Ten running back last year. Think of Dane Bellum. These guys have never had a spring practice. That's kind of crazy to think about that. Then you think of true freshmen like Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce IV, who are 2 freshman wide receivers. They're also getting their first spring practice at the same time as these 3rd and 4th year guys.
That's the thing that intrigues me, is I'm anxious to talk to you as the weeks progress here about the skill position players. But you have put out great information as well in reference to, Kallenberger retired or gave up his football career, and he had some experience. Hard to use the word retire from college football, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But it's intriguing that he could have been, at least had some experience in the offensive line. Alaric Jackson gone. There are some holes to fill here, but the strength is obviously going to be to the defensive backfield, as you mentioned, with 5 guys with either starting or massive playing experience. But let's talk about the offensive line that's going to be protecting the quarterback position at Iowa. Very important, as we know.
Tyler Linderbaum and a whole hodgepodge of untapped potential, Dave. I mean, that's really what it is. But you think of guys like Jack Plum's going to have a big say in it. Cody Ince is going to have a big say. But keep in mind, Cody Ince is out for spring football due to an undisclosed injury, as Kirk Ferentz announced last week. Nick DeJong, I think David Davidkoff, the true freshman offensive tackle, I think he's going to crack the 2 deep by the end of his freshman season. But again, he's a guy who is missing spring football due to recovering from some nagging injuries that were sustained before arrival on campus. I mean, you go up and down the list. I mean, I think there's a whole lot of guys. Kyler Schott's going to have a say on the interior offensive line. Justin Britt's going to have a say. But 2 brand new offensive tackles, and it's going to be just incredibly interesting to see how. Remember, new offensive line coach George Barnett, how that's going to end up, because you got to think about everybody's got to be on a fresh, clean slate right now with a new position coach. Obviously, Kirk and Brian will have their say. But Barnett's incredibly respected. He's had a great career coaching the offensive line. So again, that's going to be one of my top 3 things I look for on Saturday. How are the reps looking? Who's kind of standing out and whatnot? But again, it's Tyler Linderbaum, and I think a lot of other guys that have potential, but they need the quality reps that they haven't really gotten so far.
David, this far into the interview, we're almost 10 minutes in. We mentioned wrestling. We mentioned men's and women's basketball, national champion wrestling team at Iowa. Hawkeye baseball getting after it, having a hot spring so far. We'll talk about that as the spring progresses as well. But as we close up here and take your time here in the next minute or two, any other tidbits? You mentioned 3 questions you have. You put that out on social media. Any other tidbits that I haven't hit with you yet today on spring football that you want to close out with, please?
Yeah, you talked about the 5 returning secondary guys. Keep in mind they have UNI transfer Xavier Williams, who's going to line up at cornerback as well. And you're not talking about no scrub transfer. I mean, this kid was a first-team All-Missouri Valley twice. He has outstanding athleticism. He's going to be on draft boards. So you combine the 79 total starts in the secondary, throw Xavier Williams into that. And I'll say this again. Look out for Tyrone Tracy to have a huge year at wide receiver. I think he's coming in with a great mindset. He's one of the best all-around receivers I think Iowa has had in quite some time in terms of size, speed, skill, explosiveness. And I'm going to continue to ride this hype train as well. I think Arlen Bruce IV and Keegan Johnson, 2 true freshman wide receivers, are going to make the rotation this season. We had a chance to talk with Coach Copeland on Wednesday, so I'll be putting out live updates about that, wide receiver coach Kelton Copeland. But a lot of defensive backs, a lot of wide receivers have said these 2 are making plays right now. They're standing out. Remember, Max Cooper played as a true freshman wide receiver, and he said today that both those guys are picking up the playbook, quote, much quicker than I did. And I think that's a very, very important note as we come down the stretch of spring football, summer workouts, and as we enter the 2021 season.
Yeah, it really has been a fascinating, fun time to watch the progression of everything going on in and around the Iowa athletics program, as we talked about with all the other sports. But then, yeah, college baseball for the Hawkeyes having a heck of a spring. We'll get into that as the spring progresses, too, as we're both kind of smiling going, man, didn't we just talk about men's and women's basketball, now spring football. Exciting times at Iowa athletics, and who better to cover it than our Hawkeye insider, David Eickholt. Fantastic stuff from you as always, my friend. I look forward to catching up with you next week.
Hey, thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
My pleasure as always, and thank you. For David Eickholt, James Vandenberg, former Hawkeye quarterback, and Joe Mershman, and to you, the viewers and listeners, thanks for tuning in. As always, making us number 1 in the late night on KFXA Fox 28, going statewide starting in May, not just in the Cedar Rapids or Eastern Iowa areas, so stay tuned for the listings online, DaveO'HaraSports.com. But also stay tuned for just a moment, if you would, for the closing credits on this show, the rolling credits that mention our advertisers and sponsors as they take care of this show and keep us on the air. So please give them your business when you're able to, and we greatly appreciate that and them. So again, for the aforementioned guest, I'm Dave O'Hara with Hawkeye. That's all from me. Thanks to all of you.